Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to session 415 of Humanity Rising. Today, we're going to explore how we prepare ourselves for the future. But before we dive into that program, I want to just bring into our awareness an interview that I saw recently with Novak Djokovic on BBC, which I recommend to all of you. As you know, from the beginning of the pandemic back in May of 2020, we've been providing updates and different points of view on the pandemic. And you'll recall that a month or so ago, Djokovic, who's the top seeded tennis player in the world, considered by some the best tennis player of all time, actually, was denied entry into Australia for the Australian Open because of his refusal to take a vaccination. And he has been now confronted with the reality that he may be denied the French Open and Wimbledon. And they had the most interesting interview with him. And the interviewer said, why, Kovac, are you not just getting the vaccine? And Kovac said, it's because I care for the health of my body. I watch everything that goes into my body because I'm an elite athlete. And in my judgment, the vaccines are deleterious to human health. And then the interviewer asked him a further series of questions and finally came to the end and said, listen, you are statistically on your way to being named the greatest tennis player of all time. And the fact that you're refusing to have a vaccine may deprive you of that ultimate accolade on your career. Are you really willing to make that sacrifice? And Djokovic looked him in the eye and said, yes, absolutely. My right over my body is paramount. And I want to just reflect on that for a moment in all the vax, anti-vax, vaccination mandates that's swirling in every country around the world. To come to a basic principle that Novak Djokovic is articulating on behalf of himself, but many people around the world, that it's not a question of whether you're for or against the vaccines. It's the question of every human being's right over the sovereignty of their body. I've mentioned this before because I think as we consider the human future, which is going to be our subject today, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of a world do we want? From the dawn of medical science in deep antiquity till about 18 months ago, every human being was accorded ultimate rights over their body. And over the last 50, 60 years, there's been the right debate over a woman's right over her body in relationship to abortion. And even though that's currently under assault, the courts have adjudicated that a woman does have the right over her body. And courts all over the world have said that in the end, no one should be forced to take anything into their body unless it's being done with their informed consent. From time immemorial, people have had the right that if you're healthy, you should be able to travel wherever you want to travel. If you get sick, then you quarantine. You go to the hospital or you go home and you decide with your doctor how you're going to get better. And within this context, vaccines should be an option, not the option. This is the first time in the history of the world, everyone, where governments are saying vaccines should be mandated. And that is in such a violation of medical practice, again, from time immemorial, that people like Novak Djokovic are willing to sacrifice their career for a principle that I believe all of us should seriously consider. You've all seen the truckers in Ottawa for 3 weeks now, blocking the downtown area, blocking the Ambassador Bridge to the United States, and different truckers in different parts of the world, in New Zealand and Australia and Asia and in South America, here in the United States, in Europe. People all over the world are saying no to the government imposition of vaccine mandates. And the reason why there's been this upsurge is because the mandates are striking to the heart of the sovereignty that each and every one of us must have over what happens to our body in relationship to our health. So I wanted to bring that in, and I would love it if you would go on to BBC News and listen to the interview with Novak Djokovic about these matters, because decisions are being made, policies are being enforced that are deeply impacting basic human rights in the world today. And we need to understand what's going on. We need to take perspectives on what's going on, so we don't find ourselves mindlessly surrendering basic human rights in the face of the pharmaceutical industry's aggressive unfolding of a profit-driven machine. And so that is what I would like to bring in for all of us to consider today. As you all know, we do this not in the spirit of truth possessed, but in the spirit of truth pursued. In the end, we're all like the blind men and the elephant. We see the world from very many different perspectives, and I want to honor all the perspectives. But I also, as the convener over these 18 months or so, have been bringing to our collective attention different aspects of history as they've been unfolding, so that we can collectively honor the different points of view and understand thereby more deeply what it is that's going on out there, why it's going on, and the kinds of actions we can ourselves take as we navigate through an increasingly hyper-complex and turbulent world. Let us pause now, just take it in. As one blind man describing the elephant in this session as we begin. And let us just center ourselves in our bodies. Let's just take in that our bodies are really the only thing we have between our birth and our death, and how we take care of it, what we allow to be done to our bodies, is among the most important decisions that we make. So I want to just dedicate this moment to the sovereignty and the sanctity of our bodies. And as you feel your body, feel your heart. Listen to your heartbeat in deep gratitude and thanksgiving that we're all alive at this moment. and how we think and how we act and what we do is shaping the future. Thank you, everyone. We now want to spend the next 2 days with individuals from around the world that are deeply involved in shaping the human future. Recently, I had the opportunity to become familiar with the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners group. And I was so struck by the way they are empowering young people around the world to take control over their future, to shape the future, that we decided to do a 2-day program with them and just to listen about the future from a variety of vantage points around this extraordinary earth of ours. As I was saying to them before our program started, I'm inspired day by day by how much goodness there is in the world, in all the nooks and crannies of all of our cultures and politics and social systems and economic practices. Goodness is just there, like the air that we breathe. So I want to celebrate the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners today and introduce Fash Damalola, who's coming in today from Rwanda, who's going to moderate our panel today at the first of a 2-day program on Next Generation Foresight Practitioners. So Fash, welcome from Rwanda, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that introduction. And hello, everybody that joining us from every part of the world. I'm not here alone, so I have come with a whole lot of people from the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners. I have here with me Randy, I have here Clarice, I have here Carl as well, and we are all going to be having a brilliant conversation. And we invite you, of course, to this conversation, and that's why you're here. Just to give a little bit of context before we dive into this, I'm sure many of you are thinking, what exactly is the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners that we usually shorten form as NGFP? So it's a practice that it's kind of divided into 2 different levels. We have one that we call the NGFP Award. This is something that we launch every year. And the one for this year is going to be launched in April. I'm going to be sharing more details about this for people that may want to apply, or you want to share that with people that are also thinking of coming into the foresight field. We also have what we call the Sensing Network. And the Sensing Network is a community, it's a global community that right now we are more than 500 members, and we are from almost more than 80 countries from 6 continents. And what happens within the Sensing Network is that we help different change makers to be able to kind of identify what are the signals, what are what are the kind of belief system? What are the potentials in people? What are we anticipating? How can we shape the future? And how could we mentor, coach, and create conversations that could help people to really imagine that future? And not just imagine it, but of course, to start taking action from now for us to see the kind of desired features that we have. So I just want us to dive straight into it. There'll be a whole lot more opportunity to ask questions and to also engage with us all through. And you also get an opportunity to learn more about the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners towards the end. I want to bring in my fellows today, and these fellows as well, they're part of the Sensing Network that I've described just earlier. These are some of the people that have won the award from the past years, and they are doing amazingly in their works. And they have come here today to share with us how they are using foresight in their work from different fields and from different countries as well. They're going to be sharing the countries where they're journeying from, and they'll be diving a lot into how they use foresight in their work and how you can also, of course, use foresight in the work you do, either in government, in civil societies, in your private life, and also in the future as well. So I'm going to start with Randy to introduce himself and then take it to other people.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Randy Lubin. I'm calling in from San Francisco, California, and I am very interested in the intersection of games and foresight, games and futures, games as ways of letting more people participate in exploring the future and letting their perspectives be heard, as well as gaining intuition about how the future might play out. So I got my start in early stage technology, and since then have brought in a lot of my games practice too. And we've done big games, small games for amazing clients and partners like the United Nations and World Economic Forum and Mozilla. And I'm going to be happy to talk a bit about that today.
I'm passing on to Clarice.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me in this amazing event. I'm actually Brazilian, but I live in Melbourne, Australia. So I'm doing a PhD here in the School of Fashion and Textiles. And I'm very interested in understanding how fiction can play a role in democratizing futures thinking and including more voices in the discussions about the future. And basically, this is also like because I believe that as a trend forecaster, I've been a trend forecaster for 8 years now. And I believe that trend forecasting in general, which is the short-term futures thinking practice, is very elitist and is mainly run by people in Europe, in the United States. So I was quite unhappy about that. So I decided to jump into a PhD to understand how we could look at more long-term futures and how we could include more voices on that. So I'm using fiction and speculative design and also material culture to understand values, meanings, and propositions that different voices can bring and can add to this discussion about the future. So yeah, in short, this is me.
Carl?
Hello, everyone. Calling in from Manila, Philippines, and my name's Carl. And what I'm interested in is the intersection of futures thinking and entrepreneurship, specifically with small businesses and micro enterprises. My journey to this is right after college, I went into social entrepreneurship and community-based entrepreneurship here in the Philippines. And for right after that, I joined, worked with the senator for 7 years to come up with policies for entrepreneurship in the Philippines. And now going back, circling back, becoming an entrepreneur myself, but also figuring out ways to use futures thinking tools and strategic foresight to empower and enable rural entrepreneurs who do not necessarily have access to digital tools or digital opportunities, so that they could turn those tools into ways to increase the chances of sustaining their businesses. Happy to share more throughout this conversation. Nice to meet you, everyone.
So I'm just going to take it on from Carl, and Carl is going to share a little bit more before I go back to every other person since he's on the mic at the moment. So Carl, when you think about your work, working with micro entrepreneurs in the Philippines, and I actually love the fact that you're working with grassroots communities that do not have the tools, sometimes do not have access to some of the digital tools that are available out there. What has been your experience, doing this kind of work?
Sure. First of all, my experience is that there's wherever or however accessible opportunities are, or digital opportunities are in the Philippines, there's a deep, deep hunger for more knowledge, skills, and information really as to how to grow their businesses and sustain their businesses so that they're not reliant on philanthropy or government support. Those are useful and great, but a lot of Filipinos that I've met and are working with, they find value in building something on their own and working with other people in their community to turn a problem into a solution with a business model. Now, this is not always for everyone, and part of the reason why we use futures thinking tools is to sort of uncover scenarios where businesses could be an option for a particular group of entrepreneurs, whether they're women entrepreneurs or micro entrepreneurs or youth entrepreneurs in our communities. And so far, we use a framework in entrepreneurship development here in the Philippines where, simply put, it's 3 M's: access to mentorship, access to markets, access to money or finance. And there's really an opportunity for those frameworks to sort of be layered with futures thinking tools so that if we translate it properly, we share the right knowledge and the right skills to people who normally do not have access to maybe a business education, for example, or a long-term program for transitioning from a livelihood project into a full-on entrepreneurial project. So through specific interventions targeted at specific communities in rural Philippines, we can sort of build slowly a movement around small business development here. And so far, it's been great and a fun journey.
Thank you for sharing that, Carl. I will come back to you on the fun and the kind of innovations that also happen through your work. I will go on to Randy now. Randy, you work a lot on games, in foresight, and it's quite interesting that for our NGFP award for last year, and also working with Teach the Future, where we launched the Young Voices last year. It's quite interesting that we had a lot of members within the Sensing Network that are now working on games and gaming. And, it looks like this is something that a whole lot of people are going into. I just want to know, how did you get into that? And how's the journey been so far?
Yeah, so I've always been blown away by the power of games to immerse people and transport people and also give people a voice in interesting ways. So I originally got into games. I've been playing games all my life, but especially when I moved to San Francisco, one of the main ways that I would meet people and hang out with people was hosting game days, playing board games or storytelling games. And so it was really, as I kept getting into that, I got into the idea of designing games, not necessarily serious games at first, but as I went further down that path and continued down my journey of early stage tech companies, I wanted to pair the two. So I teamed up with some friends and we designed a game about the future of elections that ended up getting some press coverage. And that just kind of led me deeper and deeper down this Foresight Games path. And actually, I just am in the process of launching a Foresight Games organization, community really, to help people who are interested in Foresight Games, who are designing Foresight Games to make it be more of a thing. But I can talk, and so you can find all that at foresight.games. There's a forum we'll be launching more formally soon. But more specifically, I think games have a lot of very cool advantages to them versus other types of workshops or ways of starting to explore the future. But I'll also say that it's all one big spectrum. It's not like there's a harsh dividing line between workshop and games. And if you're if you've designed workshops in the past, those same patterns, those same skills can apply very easily over to designing games too. But the advantages that I see, I think they're really great for creating intuition for complex systems, because the players get to interact with toy models of the world and see, oh, if I do this over here, what are the downstream consequences over there? And I think they're also great for helping to generate some empathy for different types of people, especially through role playing. I think they're great for forcing a bit of creativity and thinking out of the box, because games are good at putting artificial constraints that players have to navigate and think within. And they're great at just enabling more and more participation, because everyone's given a role and affordances to make their voice heard and to directly explore the future, either from their own perspective or from the perspective of somebody else. So for all these reasons, I think games are really powerful. And one of the things that's been really heartening is seeing how everybody, the reception has been better than I expected, in that there's some people who've like come into these games professing to be very much not gamers. And even the people who are like, oh, I don't play games, it's not for me. As soon as you give them a goal and a bit of a sense of how they might accomplish that goal, they want to accomplish that goal. And they are just in it and playing and deeply immersed and very creative. And so I think that's really heartening to me, to show that like I think we're in the early stages of exploring how games can be applied to foresight, and that there's going to be a rich set of tools and practices that emerge over the next years as we continue to discover new patterns and new ways of applying it.
Thank you so much, Randy. We're going to dive some more, okay, about some of the things that has shocked you, or some of the things that you've seen as some new insight working on game and in foresight and futures. But let's go over to Clarice. I'm really excited about what Clarice does as well. Fashion in foresight, it's quite interesting, right? And fiction as well. I just want to throw it to you, Clarice. How does it feel like?
Pash, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that for me, fashion is actually a way to express our social values and our culture. And I've been fascinated by how fashion has this paradox of how can we be sustainable, but at the same time, how can we be fashionable? And apparently, the industry has not found a way to become really sustainable. And so when we look at the industry, at the fashion industry at the moment, and the way the industry is planning future actions or future goals towards a more sustainable futures, what we see is that the industry is going around the material aspect of fashion, which means we are developing new materials, new processes, new distribution ways to save carbon emissions or things like that. But then I was like, I don't think it's enough to solve the problem, because I think that fashion is culture. Fashion is not just clothes. And so if we think about a perspective where fashion couldn't be solved, the future of fashion couldn't be more sustainable just by improving or developing new materials or new processes, how that might look like. And then I started to think, how can we use foresight tools and fiction, in my case, to understand how cultural values, how social meanings and cultural values can play a role in this, in shaping these sustainable futures for fashion. Because if we continue to buy and to consume as much as we are at the moment, just buying things and disposing them, and actually being less guilty about this consumption because maybe the material is more sustainable, I don't think we'll have a solution. And actually, so what I'm trying to understand in this path is, how can we use foresight, fiction, and design to bring these cultural values to the table, to understand how the future of fashion might look like, but also at the same time, how can we use fashion and clothes and fictional artifacts as a way to imagine new future societies and new values that can emerge by planning those objects, by designing those clothes that are fictional, but that can say a lot about the beliefs that we have or the values that we have, and how we can envision a change in terms of culture and not just in terms of materiality of fashion or of consumption. So I think that's what I'm trying to do. I don't know if I was clear. I hope so.
Thank you so much, Clarice, for sharing that. There's a whole lot more questions to ask you, especially about sustainability and what do we need to start thinking about for the future, and how can we take actions even now. But then I want to go back to Carl for a moment. And, working with grassroots communities and especially micro entrepreneurs, I see that there's a whole lot of possibilities that actually happen at the grassroots. Many times people in the city think that there is no enterprise, well, they're not making a lot of money, but there's a whole lot of things that happens there. Can you dive a little bit into what you've observed in terms of the culture, the economy, and a little bit also about the kind of mindsets that you work with when you work with people over there? And what do you think the future looks like if you think about all of that, the economy, the culture, the enterprise?
Sure. In the Philippines, and I think for many other developing areas, the pandemic sort of worsened the inequality, especially as regards access to opportunity. And so when the pandemic started in the Philippines, a lot of entrepreneurship related activities or livelihood development or small business support was transferred online. But because this has been limited to people who have access to the internet and or have a computer or a smartphone, many more in rural areas were unable to sort of access or get updated as to the things that they need to recover from the pandemic and to also build their own resilience. What we're discovering in rural communities is that, yes, there's that gap, but they're so eager to work with what they have and to work collectively to find ways to bridge not just the digital gap, but also the infrastructure gap. And so part of the reason why we use Foresight is to sort of encourage individual micro entrepreneurs or small businesses to be more open to working together, to be more collective in their approach as regards, for example, determining alternative strategies to, let's say, lobby for access to, let's say, a farm to market road or a new internet tower station so that they have access to the internet. And through futures thinking, much of the strategies that are surfaced are really all about the need to come together. And I know that sounds so simple, but it takes a while for entrepreneurs to sort of who have been throughout much of their career working on their own. And most of the micro entrepreneurs in the Philippines are single employee with very few staff. And so most of the time they're more geared towards their own small business and are so focused on that. What futures thinking tools sort of help is that it allows them to see that there's really a need to come together. And it's better if they see it themselves and it's not an imposition from, let's say, someone from the city, or it's not someone from government saying, oh, you should work together and come together, but the realization that comes from within themselves that there is this need. The pandemic escalated all of that, exacerbated that need, but at the same time, through futures thinking and through strategic foresight, we can find a way for them to sort of come to that realization much more genuinely. And so far, it's quite fascinating to see how this will result into solutions that could withstand even the pandemic, so that in future pandemic shocks or other shocks that will come to rural communities in the Philippines, they're a lot more resilient and they're a lot more ready to face these other challenges.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Carl. Let's go to Randy. So Randy, Carl has been talking a little bit about access, digitalization, working with grassroots communities. And one of the things that, for example, within the Sensing Network, we're always, having conversations about is how can people really connect? how do different industries connect? What are you doing in your industry that relates to mine? How can we build the world together? So looking at your own kind of expertise, Randy, in game, how do you think this is relevant to other industries and also bringing foresight into play?
Sure, yeah. I think games can be really great at fostering connection in that, one, they create a vessel for everyone to be in the same place, either digitally or in person. And when games involve either actual role playing where you're taking on different roles, or at the very least, just some creative imagining, you get to very quickly build rapport and understanding with each other in a very playful way that can really build deep and strong bonds. So I've seen this time and again, both in serious games and in the more fun consumer games, where it is a great way to build a lot of closeness and just like strengthen a relationship very quickly. It's amazing. Like you can feel like you've known somebody for years after a short but intense game. And it allows people to bring usually their full selves to the game, and you can see their humor and creativity come through, as well as they're caring for each other, making sure everyone's voices are heard, etc. So I think in terms of just the pure connective power of games, there's a lot there. In terms of how it can impact industries, I think there's a bunch of different elements, many of which overlap with what Carl was talking about, in terms of making sure giving people have ways to have their voices heard, and hopefully have that all bubble up into something that ends up making a bigger impact. So depending on the type of game and the approach, making sure that there are very clear and discrete affordances for people to voice their hopes and their concerns and their opinions, and make sure those are captured in a way that can then be synthesized into something that's shareable beyond a given event with either other people in an industry or other key stakeholders. And so I think games, again, are really great for creating vessels that have those clear affordances for people to share, and then have what they've shared remixed and shared further.
Fantastic. I'm going to go to Gladys, and we'll touch on this conversation about sustainability and also connection, because fashion really connects people. People look at you and then they make an assumption or they make a conclusion. So when you think about sustainability and you think about connection in relation to your work, how do you see that kind of framework connecting together?
It's a very good question, Fash, because what I see now is that despite the differences of style of individuals, as someone put in the chat, like the self-expression side of fashion, I think that the connection between all of us in the end is this connection that we can have our own styles or our own preferences, but we have just one planet to share. And if we have just one planet, this one planet is shared by all of us. So this is a common concern. I think that today, when we look at fashion, if we compare how we approach fashion today, looking back to like 20 years ago, how it was, and now how it is, we can easily remember that 20 years ago, the fast fashion was like rising, and we are just absolutely not concerned about sustainability. It was not in our minds. So it was completely out of the game. It was completely out of the discussion. And now what we see is that although there is this paradox, I think that we are still too slow into transitioning to more sustainable futures in terms of fashion. But at the same time, there is at least a new mindset emerging, and everyone is kind of more aware or like more conscious about what we buy and why we buy. But also there is another level when we talk about fashion, which is the complexity of the systems. So the connections also happen when we look at the way fashion is produced in different countries. Also, raising the inequalities between different countries. So the exploitation of poor countries in the workforce, for example, it's a very common sense in fashion, which is very, very sad. And it's not acceptable anymore. But still, there is this connection also into the supply chain. It's what I'm trying to say. And I think that today we are a little bit more aware as well that if something goes wrong in Bangladesh, it will impact business in Europe. And so fashion as an industry, with all the problems it has as an industry, I think that fashion is an heavy industry, and that's why I'm doing a PhD in that field, despite the interests of the industry, we are more aware that we cannot ignore and exploit people as we have been doing so far. So I think that this connection in terms of supply chain is also something that is emerging, and it is quite significant at the moment. Although we need more actions towards a better future, more equitable futures, I think that it's a new discussion that has been emerging in the last 5-10 years.
Fantastic. So let's go a little bit into policy making. Let's go more into citizen-driven governance, and all of these kind of things. How do you see your work kind of maybe on the first level, changing mindset of people, either to work together or to, synergize and make policy change or make communities better? And how do you think your work as well could also help policymakers to be brought into this conversation on a very seamless level, where we can remove the bureaucracy, and just get everyone on the same page and begin to shape the world together? I think I would take that first to Randy and then to others.
All right, so I think there's a few approaches, but I think the most important one that I've seen firsthand is allowing policymakers who may not be subject matter experts to quickly grasp some of the complexities of a specific topic. So specifically, many of my games have dealt with the intersection of tech and politics. And oftentimes, coming from both directions, folks don't fully understand the nuances and idiosyncrasies of the other side of things. So we've definitely had goals of let's help policymakers understand why the tech is more complicated than they think, and the tech people understand the incentives involved in policymaking. And oftentimes, if you can get both sides as players in the same game, or it doesn't have to be a game or a workshop or whatever it might be, then they gain this much deeper appreciation, and they build connections and bridges that will hopefully see them through to formulating better policy. One of the things I've seen time and again, so we have a game on content moderation and trust and safety at scale, which is a topic that very frequently policymakers will say, oh, it's so easy. Why don't you just do A or B or C, and that'll just solve everything? And of course, reality is much more complex. And if you do A, well, then suddenly there's side effects D, E, and F. And so having a game where people can try and do the easy solution and then realize what the consequences, the negative consequences of the easy solution actually are, so powerful. So I really hope that we'll see a lot more use of games or game-like activity to help people explore and appreciate the nuances and then of a situation, and then also explore the consequences of different types of policy as they intersect with slimmed down models of reality to just get that first and second order approximation of how might this affect things.
Yeah, Kyle, can you take it on?
Sure. I resonate very much with what Randy was sharing. And maybe my build to that is one of my favorite concepts in futures thinking is just this very basic idea that there could be alternative futures out there. And my experience with policymakers is that they're so used to predicting they prefer to predict the future, that, the future is something that we can sort of has its specific things that we can sort of prepare for. But the reality is that, just our experience the past 2 years, you can't predict the future. But there are alternative futures. Some of them are more plausible than others, but it's an invitation to, regardless of the plausibility of a particular future, you still invite a community or a group of people to explore and be immersed in that possible future. And for me, whenever we try to link, for example, community-based entrepreneurs, small businesses with policymakers, that discussion around alternative futures, what could this future, what could 2030, 2050 look like if this happened or if that happened, loosens up the formality of being a policymaker, because oftentimes they're expected to come up with very specific solutions or very well thought of solutions. But if you provide a space or a platform, maybe just an hour or two, where you invite them to experiment, to play, and to Randy's point, play with games, and so suddenly that formality is gone, and it's less intimidating, and so it's also more inclusive for people who aren't used to, you know, formal positions of authority or power, to participate in a conversation around what these alternative futures could look like and what possibly could we do to be prepared if such an alternative future takes place. And so far it's been interesting. Of course, it's not every single policymaker is comfortable at this type of futures thinking right away. You sort of also have to work with, at first in the beginning, with a few who are more open to these types of conversation. But slowly and surely, once a few get the hang of it, we invite more, and soon enough you can build policies that are more future-proof and are more adaptable to whatever the future holds. And so that conversation around alternative futures is my favorite so far.
Super. Clarice?
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. It's amazing. And I was thinking also about the power of these small groups and these small realities when we look at policymakers as well. So, because when we think about this, about policies, we tend to look at this sort of world, a big world, like just unified world where everything should be quite the same, while I believe that these alternative futures can be also futures for and from different places and communities, and the small scale can make a really big change. So sometimes it's just a neighborhood, sometimes it's just a small community of independent designers that start the change, and that change starts to inspire authorities or policymakers that are sometimes in those places of power, and they start to look at the change not just as a discourse, but as an action. So starting small is a very powerful way to change policies. And I also think in terms of fashion, our role as consumers is very, very powerful as well, when we start to not follow trends, but we start to question and to challenge the industry around why should we change the colors every year? Why should we change the shapes every year? Why it doesn't last? Why it's not equitable, and so on. So I think that we have, as consumers, we can also stop buying things. And this is a very big message to those that are in the role of planning and doing the policies for the future.
I think I like what you just said, Clarice, about communities, okay, creating these changes, more communities and people coming together, you know, creating small changes and then escalating some of those kind of things. And that takes me to you know, what has brought all of us together, which is the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners. All of you are fellows within this network. And I just wanted you to share, you know, with everyone listening in today, what does that community mean to you? You know, the Next Generation Foresight Practitioner Fellowship Program, the Sensei Network, what does it mean to you? And, you know, what has been your experience being in that network? So let's start with Clarice and then to every other person.
All right. I think that for me, it means like it's a very awesome opportunity to be connected with people that are into the same path, but from different perspectives. because I think that we can approach futures and foresight from different ways, as Randy has the games, or, you know, so and I have fashion and so on. So I think that it's a very powerful, it's very powerful community, because I think that we inspire each other, and I think that we also give some support to each other during this path and this journey. I really believe that futures should be collective. And so in having this small community, we can see this small collective of futures thinkers that are young, that have this desire to change or to transition to better societies, to better futures, but in different fields, from different perspectives. So that's awesome. Having this plurality inside a community. That's what I was trying to say.
Super, Carl.
Sure. And just to build on what Clarice said, I also, from the community, a very practical takeaway for me is some form of validation that we're onto something. I always love to tell people that even the choir sometimes needs preaching. I mean, of course, we will go out to the communities, we will go out to people beyond our networks, but you can't always just go out. You also have to fill in your own humanity, and having a community who sort of, just what Clarice was saying, shares that is very inspiring and a big boost of confidence, especially when there are times where you're wondering if this particular futures thinking tool, for example, is relevant, or you're having doubts about the process. Do we really have to build the community, to build conversation around this? Do we really have to go the extra mile of mobilizing people together? Because it can get tough, and it can get, especially during these moments where you're isolated from your usual physical network. And having that as a global community as well is another aspect to it. It adds to what Clarice was saying about the plurality of perspectives, and a very wonderful surprise to see how it's applied to fields that I never thought could be an avenue for futures thinking. So it's always so inspiring to see that.
Randy?
Yeah, I mean, both of what Clarice and Carl said is just so true and so spot on. I think in my individual practice, I've seen that, like, I'm a firm believer that, like, everything is experience design, and whether it's a game or a workshop or something else, it's experience design, and you can bring patterns to bear. And I think the NGFP community everybody comes from such different contexts, different industries, and they all have their own approach to experience design, their own patterns to bring to the table. And so it's been so fun to see that and see how might we borrow and remix and build on each other's patterns. And everyone's, again, it feels like everybody in the program is forging ahead into the unknown and creating new tools and new ways of engaging in foresight, but all pushing in different parts of the future, inventing in different directions. And again, when we can bring some of these cool insights and new tools together, we all can benefit and become stronger and create better tools that go on to then help the people who are participating in the experiences we create. Another thing that's just so cool is that everyone brings their own really great complementary skills to the table, whether it's visual design or facilitation or research. So just getting to see those people shine at those skills and hopefully learn from them too. And I feel like it's setting up will hopefully be years and years of very cool, very wonderful collaboration in the future. And of course, the other thing that NGFP is really great at, the broader network, even beyond just our class of fellows, is really, really powerful. The other policymakers and experts, folks in some of the most powerful and influential institutions in the world. So, and the fact that we have access to them and the ability to work with them to explore the future is just such a treat.
Fantastic. So let's do a little bit more about communities. So you're part of the NGFP communities, and I'm sure people on the call today are thinking, how can they also join communities? Let's think about communities for a moment. What do people need to look out for in joining communities? What is the role of communities, right? In kind of, Clarice, you work in fashion, Carl, you're working with entrepreneurs, Randy, you're working in games, and we have so many other fellows and members of the Sensing Network working in different fields, agriculture, education, a whole lot. Now, for communities, what would be your thoughts around connecting with communities, and what is the role of communities in your industry and also for people that want to kind of get into foresight? Let's start with Carl.
Sure. The communities play a lot of roles. I would say that one way to start is to, at least in our work with young people, especially with young entrepreneurs, the most prevailing pathway to building community is through finding an issue that they care about and realizing that there are other people who care similarly. Entrepreneurship is just one of many advocacies and ways of living out there. And what we see is that once you sort of identify or find a tribe, you can then again build community around that, but also realize that together in that particular community, you can define ways of working together, and then learn from one another and inspire one another, because as the work gets more difficult and more complicated, and as more uncertainty comes into play, and my favorite social entrepreneur reminded me once that complexity always follows. And so if you have a community of like-minded individuals or a diverse group of people, but are sharing in this particular vision, you're a lot more resilient to whatever future will come. And so that invitation to that particular community may start very, very small and with a very specific issue, but oftentimes it's also quite fascinating to see how coalitions, alliances, and all sorts of other communities grow based on whatever happens in a particular geographic space. So having that openness, I think, requires confidence and courage that you sort of draw from the community that you initially build, and with that you sort of navigate the future much more confidently. So that's one particular thing that we've seen, particularly among young entrepreneurs in rural areas here in the Philippines.
Clarice, communities.
I think that the role of communities in general, as Carl said, I think that it's like a way to get support, to be encouraged, to be inspired by others, but also, and it's also a sort of way to find identification with some values or some beliefs that we can have. So as Carl said, finding like-minded people, I think that this is one of the roles of communities. But also I was thinking about that we cannot forget that communities, even though we are bounded together by shared values, we also have space for differences, for dissonances, for disagreements, for plural visions or plural mindsets around the same issue. And I think that's the beauty of the role of communities, because they are not just a way I want to find people that think exactly like me, but I want to be together with people that have core values that are aligned with mine, but I'm also open to hear other perspectives and to build on what we think is valuable or not valuable around the issue that we are engaging with. So I think that, this sense of having some dissonances inside the communities is also, for me at least, a very valuable perspective.
Randy.
Yeah, I think so much of community design is about intentionality. And I think that can start from the earliest stages, because a community can emerge from just a like, hey, let's all jump on a phone call and talk about something. And if it goes well, let's continue that conversation later, right? And so I think some intentionality of like, here's why we want to gather, here's roughly at least, some of where we might want to start, and we'll see where we spider out. And then just the power of putting a name on things. So it could just start with a bunch of peers jumping on a call, but then saying like, oh, we're the whatever group or community, then becomes a nice bright spotlight to start attracting other people in, which gets to what Carl and Clarice were talking about in terms of enabling more people to come in and for the thing to grow. And then that also leads to other interesting opportunities for that community. I think other key things I'd call out are just from the earliest days, really being intentional about the inclusivity and safety of communities. I think it's very easy for something to sort of start small and organically grow, but grow in a way that is inapproachable or potentially even unsafe for some people who would want to join, or that either in appearance or reality has gatekeeping. And so I think from the earliest steps of community design, making sure you're clear on what the values of that community are and the participants that you want to attract and include. So really just not just going on sort of autopilot and having the community evolve in its own way, but again, being intentional about what you want that community to be and who you want to be in that community.
Fantastic. Let's go a little bit into what is happening in your field right now. What are the things that you're really concerned about, and you're thinking, what if the world could know more about this and do something about it? What are those things that you want the world to hear about in your industries? Let's start with Clarice.
I think that for me, the big concerns or the big questions at the moment is how can we solve such complex problems and issues around the world and around in my case, in my field, around fashion, and how can we and how can fashion goes to a better direction that is not just around its materiality, but that could be a change of paradigm of consumption and of the way we value clothes and why we buy and what does it represent in our culture. So I think that for me, this is my main concern at the moment. And also like all the implications that the fashion system has at the moment, that is not only about water shortage or resources, but it's also about our mental health, how fashion could be damaging our mental health in a way. So we are still trying to follow some patterns, some standards that maybe we are not embracing plurality as we should. And I think that those are the main concerns that I have.
Okay, we're going to take this to Randy. So Randy, for games, there's a whole lot of questions, okay? There's a question about data. There's a question about, people feeling that, how do I use this? Someone else is using it better. There's a whole lot of concerns. For you, what is that thing in your industry that you're really concerned about?
I think, using games in an applied fashion for foresight, it's really nascent, at least outside of some institutions like military organizations have used games to play with the future for well over a century, but in the corporate world and in NGOs, it's much rarer. So I think the things that are most top of mind to me are severalfold. One is how do we encourage the adoption and exploration of this? How do we normalize it too? Because there's still certain gatekeepers in some institutions who will be like, we don't do games here. We're a serious organization. We won't engage with that. And so there's some issues of, okay, how do we make sure games have sort of an air of respectability to them? How do we better prove out that they can have an impact and make voices heard that would not be heard otherwise, have perspective shown that would not otherwise have been seen or captured? So that's sort of one cluster of concern and thinking. But again, because it's so nascent, I think just building up a broad pattern library of here are different areas that we can use games to tackle different problems or surface different insights, and making it really easy for somebody who is facing a challenge in an organization to say, okay, based on the constraints of this challenge, let me choose this type of game or that type of game, because that's really a fit. And in doing so, let me choose, these affordances, these attributes to the game, because that'll most lead to the result I want. So I think there's a ton. It's really fun being in the early stages of a new field because there's just so much discovery to be done. And so I'm very excited on that side. And I think that there's an adjacent thing, which I think will be essential to helping foresight games and applied gaming really take off, which is self-facilitating games. Many of the games I've run require 1 to 4 people to facilitate an experience from 15 to 100 people live at the same time. And I think the more that we can design experiences that run on their own mean that anyone in any context facing any problem can just pull in a game with the group of people they're collaborating with and just play it and run it and not feel like they need to be experts in game design or facilitation or anything else to use that set of tools.
Kyle.
Sure. I earlier alluded to some of the challenges among small businesses and entrepreneurs here in our part of the world, and a big chunk of it is really about the digital divide, right? There are solutions and opportunities that are now available online, but not everyone can access them. Now, specific to futures thinking for entrepreneurs, though, one major challenge so far is that we're at the very early stages of coming up with tools that are geared towards entrepreneurs that are micro and small. Most of the guides, workshops, and all the other tools out there are usually for bigger organizations or for corporations or government or big foundations, whereas most micro entrepreneurs don't really have a lot of time to spare outside running their micro enterprise. And so translating some of these tools in a way that, yes, addresses their long-term goals, but in a way can also be connected to their medium-term, or if possible, although this is still the challenge, translating it also to their short-term goals. Is it, for example, through maybe team building within their staff, or because you're organizing them to push for a particular policy in their region or in their province so that their mayor listens to what their community of entrepreneurs need to, let's say, access a particular market. So translating, because futures thinking tools from the onset usually inspire long-term thinking and allow participants to think about way beyond the future and alternative futures at that. The challenge there is to sort of make it clear to entrepreneurs who have limited bandwidth, limited time, limited resources, to also see that long-term thinking is very much connected to short-term goals, that for the next quarter, for the next month, what your actions now, how you think about the future has a connection. And it's been tricky to find the right words, for example, the right the language, because again, the ones that we've had access to can quite be intimidating. But what has been useful is using local language and the way local community members use specific terms or specific words that actually are thinking about the future. It's just packaged or written or articulated in a different way. And that for me is the exciting part, discovering how in their own area, in their own community, in their own culture, and in their own dialect or language, they're actually talking about the future. It just doesn't sound like that from an outsider, because I'm so used to, say, for example, an English futures thinking tool. And that's for me is a hope to sort of fix that or address that challenge.
So I like the point that you made just now, Carl, especially about using local languages to interact with micro entrepreneurs, leveraging, having this conversation that can really help them to grow. Let's think about human potential. And I believe so many people on this call are thinking about how can we really take action that can help human potential to grow for you, for example, Carl, you have to use local languages, to be able to get people to connect and be able to grow together. Let's look at every other person as well. The speakers hop here. In your industry and in the work that you do, how are you helping human potentials to thrive? Let's start with Randy with games.
Sure, I think this will echo some of the themes we've talked about earlier, but I think to the extent that games can help people see possibilities they hadn't considered previously, or not just possible endpoints, but explore possible pathways to those futures, I think that that's really incredibly powerful at helping them reach greater and greater potentials. So really on both those angles, and also giving them a safe place. And this is a little bit less on the specific work I'm doing, but I think games are a great place to play around in a very safe way and safe environment with making very big and very different decisions. And if they fail, well, that's okay, because it's just within the bounds of a game and simulation. And I think the same is true too of skill acquisition. Games are really great at letting you test out different skills, from different types of decision making to public speaking to even specific job related skills potentially. So I think all of that just makes games a great conduit for exploring different ways of increasing potential and achieving potential.
So it's interesting how, Randy's eyes lights up when he's talking about games and how human potentials can thrive. Now, I want to take it to Clarice. Now, I think what are you going to do, or what are you doing to help human potentials to thrive from your industry?
I think that in fashion, there is a good side in futures thinking, which is fashion is part of our lives, like for everyone. So everyone, even though the people that say, I don't care about fashion is intrinsically in our lives, in everyone's lives. So I think that when, for example, in my practice, when I use fiction as a tool to imagine futures, to imagine future artifacts, it's a way also to help people to reflect on the values and on the actions that they are taking in the present. So not just in the future. So we can use the future as a way to reflect on our own choices at the present moment, and also as a tool to reflect on what past actions end up to become the present that we have now. So I think that having fashion as a tool to enhance humanity, like to thrive humanity in a sense, I think that it's this way of, through my objects, how can I think about my values? I think that that's the power of fashion in this field.
Okay, it's looking like Carl mentioned a bit on that, okay, but I'm going to take it back to you, Carl, and I want you now to zoom in on it. So you're using, for example, local languages to really engage people in your communities. All of these kind of engagement that you're having, helping, human potentials to thrive. How do you think this can get global? Okay, you're in the Philippines, but what do you see, all of these things that you're doing to leverage, right, for more people across the world to also kind of, tap into their own kind of potentials?
Sure. One way, and now that I sort of think about it, it's quite ironic, but one of the things that I found really exciting in the work that we're doing is when we tap onto local language. I know that it will sound foreign to others who are not familiar with that local language, but the exploration as to why this particular word, for example, means a certain ways, and hence why it captures, for example, a particular future thinking tool. Just as a quick example, and then I'll go back to the question. In the local Tagalog language, the translation for future is bukas. But interestingly enough, that's also the same word for open, or having an open mind, having an open heart, etc. And the conversation suddenly becomes around. So why in this particular language, for example, is this word the same for both meanings? And can we sort of explore that? And can we then have it starts very simply, but at least connect with our forefathers, our ancestors, as to how did our language evolve this way that it can come up with these certain connections. And I find that really helpful for globalizing it in a way, is because you then appreciate a very specific and a very rooted history. And with that, you sort of empower also that particular community to say that, hey, our history is also interesting, and we are part of this global conversation. And there are connections in our local language, for example, that could inspire conversation elsewhere, and see where it goes. And just that openness to the possibility of what these particular words, for example, could mean in different settings, and why they evolve that way, and why they why they can be translated that way, for me opens up into a lot of conversation that connects the past in a way that also invites more exploration towards the future. And so that for me is the exciting part. There's the answer isn't always clean or neat though. Like it could be just a happenstance, or like just a coincidence. But the potential for thinking playfully about how it came to pass is the exciting part.
Fantastic. We are moving gradually to the end of this conversation, but it looks like a conversation that I want to have with you for the next 3 hours or 3 days, right? But just a few more questions and thoughts. So let's go back a little bit into the NGFP community, where all of you are fellows, and let's think about it now. So you are working in specific fields. And there are people on this call as well that are also working in different other fields as well. Now, take a little bit out of your field for a moment, okay? What other fields would you say that you're really thinking of working with, okay? And that you maybe at some point found some of these, connections within the NGFP community, and how can people listening as well can find such kind of communities where they can jump out a little bit from their current industry, yeah, and begin to think of how do they come into the work that you do, and how to create, bigger kind of, change across the world. Okay, so your field, step out of it a little bit. What other field do you really want to learn more from, and you're found in the NGFP community, and other people could also connect with in their field as well? Okay, so Kali's like, okay, hold on a second. I'll take it to Randy to start with.
Well, I think on the subject of what are the adjacent fields to look at, I think I'll go back to what I've probably said now twice or 3 times, is that like everything is just experience design. So looking at who's on the interesting cusp or forefront of experience design is so powerful. So for me, I love immersive and interactive theater. I love live action role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, board games, different types of video games. I think all of these have great patterns to draw on. And whether I'm involving it in my own game design work, or I'm just thinking, how do I, anyone who's ever hosted a party or planned a meeting, like has engaged in experience design. So I think there's degrees of like, how do we pull on these great threads and the interesting patterns being explored in these other contexts in. And so I think just starting to look just throughout your day at like different things you participate in, whether they're formal or informal, and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and how do you incorporate that into the own things that you're organizing and planning in your own life. Super powerful.
Clarice.
I'd love to have games, Randy. I'd love to, to work with games as well, for one basic reason. Fashion nowadays is very, very into games, and they are both like, they are 2 fields that are merging very fast. So, I think that also, if we think about young people, the Gen Zs, and the potential of digital fashion and the potential of games as well, I think that there is room there to explore futures for young people merging games and fashion. And also I was thinking about entertainment. Fashion has this sort of celebrity culture somehow, movies, things like that, parties, lifestyle. So I think that it could be also a way to explore a little bit.
Okay, Carl, now finally over to you.
I would, my first answer would have been similar to Clarice, that I'm also fascinated by games and experience design and how it would, because entrepreneurship is, I mean, a lot of the ways we teach entrepreneurship so that it's more interesting and impactful is through games. But aside from that, because we've already covered that, I'm also very interested in the future of food and agriculture in many communities, especially in rural Philippines. Most entrepreneurs are in that sector, and the future of that sector will definitely impact how they will run their business, how they will start a business, how they will work together with other businesses. And so the Philippines is still, I mean, a lot of our citizens still rely on agriculture as their source of income. And how other countries, for example, are developing their agriculture sector is guidance for us here. And so I'm very excited to see what that would look like. We're currently exploring that through other initiatives in WeSolve Foundation, which is a collective impact firm, and see if it can be translated into specific strategies for small businesses, entrepreneurs, because we would argue even smallholder farmers, for example, have the capacity to be entrepreneurs themselves with the right interventions and with the right community supporting them. There's that very clear connection between the very large food and agriculture sector and field and industry here in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia, and also this community of entrepreneurs that we are mobilizing.
Thank you so much, Carl, Randy, and Clarice. I'm sure there are probably people that are just coming in or probably didn't catch this at the very beginning. This is the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners, which is established by the School of International Futures. And I'm the global weaver. Then here with me on this panel is fellows. And just maybe you're thinking, what is the NGFP or the Next Generation Foresight Practitioner? We are a global community that are driving integral kind of role in agenda setting, connecting today's decision makers with change makers, and of course, bringing conversations that matter. Currently, we have more than 500 members across over 80 countries and in 6 continents. And there's a whole lot of, a lot of emerging possibilities that is happening with this community at the moment. And, you've been listening to these 3 fellows, and I'm sure there's a lot of inspiration coming to your mind and different other things, that you are thinking of exploring. Of course, this summit is not going to be enough for us to really dig into all the conversations and all the insight, and maybe even the questions that you have on your mind. Just to share with you, you're thinking of how can you learn more about each of the fellows and also about the Next Generation Foresight Practitioner. The website we'll put on the chat where you could learn more and even sign up to hear more about some of the things that are happening with other fellows and other members from every part of the world. Every year we have what we call the NGFP Awards. The awards is in the 5th year for this year, and it's going to be opening in April. There are so many people that or even yourself, that you're thinking of coming to this community where you can interact with people like Randy, Carl, and Clarice, and many other fellows within the community, and you're thinking of applying for this award this year. On that website as well, you can sign up for the newsletter where you will learn a whole lot more on how to apply or share that opportunity with people that would like to come into this community. Beyond these awards, there are judges, every year that come into these communities as well that help us look through these awards. Perhaps you have a lot of experience in the foresight field or in specific sectors. You're welcome to actually engage with us and to get in as a judge to look through the applications for this year and be part of that community to share. Beyond the fact that you can be a judge, you can also become mentors. It could be peer mentorship, it could be different kind of mentorship that we have within the community. So you could be part of that as well. But of course, you have to get to the website, sign up, have conversations with us, and then we can share with you how all of these things happen. Within the network, we don't just have conversations like this. We also create different kind of tools and resources that help people to actually take things to action, not just conversations, right? So we have things such as Impact Fund, that opens at different times of the year that you can also support. So if you're thinking of donating to that impact fund, where many change makers from across the world, some in underrepresented communities, could really tap into this kind of funds to turn their ideas, their foresight, emerging initiatives into different kind of possibilities. So this is also possible as well. We have a podcast that we also, our fellows and different members of the Sense Network share more about the work that they do. This is also somewhere that you can also get into and have conversations there. You can share more about the things that you're doing as well and interact with different people, both the judge, both the mentors, everybody within the Sensing Network as well. So as we wrap this up, I'm just going to go around, for all the speakers on the stage at the moment. And I wanted to share, what is that one thing that you want to leave the audience with today? Let's start with Randy.
Well, one, just the power and potential of games to include more people in foresight practices, thinking about the future, thinking about alternate different futures. And I guess I'll also leave the thought that truly anyone can be a game designer. I firmly believe this, and the best way to start is by taking a game that you're already familiar with and starting to modify it and change it and remix it. And it's never been easier to get started.
Clarice?
I think that for me is the idea that the futures are shared in our collective, in our plural. So how can we get all involved in these discussions as much as we can to shape the better futures for all? I think that's it, with all the diversity that it might have.
Fantastic. Carl?
Yes, I think for me, as shown in the work that we're trying to accomplish, futures thinking is for any size of organization, no matter how small, no matter how big. There is futures thinking can be valuable for you, for your work, and for your community. And so it can be intimidating for some, but it can be powerful no matter the size of community that you are a part of.
Fantastic. So once again, this is the end of this conversation. If you really want to engage with everyone that has spoken today, you'll also see some of the resources, to read more about them from the website, from some of the work that they have done. You find all of these on the chat that is going to be shared. And like I said, if you want to learn about this community, the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners network, you also find a link on the chat there that you can also learn a lot more and engage with us on different levels, to speak, to have conversations, to lead sessions, and also to engage with us for the NGFP Awards that we launch every year. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us from every part of the world, either it's in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the night. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us and sticking with us till this point. We are wishing every one of you a good day and enjoy yourself. I'm passing it on to Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Fash and Randy and Carl and Clarice. This has been one of the best dialogues we've had in some time on Humanity Rising. So I just want to applaud all of you for the dynamism of your interactivity. And Fash, you've done a brilliant job just bringing it all together and moderating it and keeping it alive. So I just want to acknowledge that. And thank you all for it. And I want to just probe, and I know we're just about out of time, but I wanted to raise, since you're foresight practitioners, this phenomenon of the black swan. As you said, Carl, I was very intrigued that, it's almost impossible to predict the future. And there's been all kinds of predictions about the future, and almost none of them came to pass. And I was involved with this since in my early days, when I was your age. I was very much involved with the Soviet Union and the CIA and the M6 and Mossad, everybody, all these big intelligence agencies expected the Soviet Union to remain a totalitarian system, kind of in perpetuity. And when the Berlin Wall fell, which is an example of a black swan event, that's why I'm raising it, and I'd like to get your comment, there was virtually no one in the world that was a professional Sovietologist that saw that coming. Similarly with 9/11, there was all this Sturm und Drang in the Middle East and everything kind of happening. And then all of a sudden there was the attack on the World Trade Towers in the Pentagon. And all the people who were in the business of understanding and analyzing the future didn't see it coming. So I wanted to, with your permission, just to take a few extra minutes. I would love, again, because you're foresight practitioners, have you comment on this black swan phenomenon in history, because we don't see it coming, but once it happens, we connect the dots and understand that what happened was actually essentially inevitable. It's just nobody was connecting the dots in the right way. And one of the things I've appreciated is I've learned more about this and through the games. Randy, I'd love to talk more on the games, and this scenario planning is really an attempt through game to enable people to connect dots that they don't normally take into consideration when they're living their lives or planning for the future. So would love to just have all of your quick comments on the black swan phenomenon.
Sure, I can jump in. I have some immediate thoughts. I think my thoughts break down to two categories. One, that even if the black swans themselves are intrinsically not predictable, having a good sense of the system dynamics, which again you can get intuition of through games or through other approaches, gives you a sense of when the black swan happens, what might the second, third, and fourth order effects of that be, so that you go from immediate swirling uncertainty to being able to project out and say, okay, consequences, let's talk about this. Likewise, I love the old phrase that while plans are often useless, the act of planning is incredibly helpful, which again points to, okay, black swan event has happened. How do we best react to it to advance our goals or values or whatever it might be?
Clarice?
Yeah, I think that I agree with Randy. It's a very good thought. And I was also thinking about how, like, the importance of thinking about alternative futures. If we have the black swans around, because we will always have them, so they are inevitable. But if we practice the way of looking at the future as a plurality of opportunities instead of just one way, one prediction, one story, I think that we can create some elasticity in terms of thinking about the future, and then we can deal with that when the black swan happens. We can have more, we can be more prepared to, from that, create new alternative futures again and again and again. So I think that it's a sort of exercise of futures as well, to be prepared to rethink futures from a black swan perspective again and again. And that's how I feel.
Just very quickly, I agree completely with Randy and Grace. There's what's great about knowing that there's always going to be a black swan is the humility to accept that, again, this is not a prediction exercise. It's not to say that A, B, and C will happen, but just to say that in case A or B or C happens, that we're a little more ready than just be completely shocked by it. Aware that even identifying A, B, and C will not completely capture everything. So for me, it serves as a reminder to just always be humble in the work that we're doing, because you really will never know what happens next. And it makes it also more fun and exciting, because it won't be so boring if we know what 2023 will look like in every single part of it. So that's my takeaway from that.
Well, thank you. And Fash, did you want to make a quick comment on the black swan?
Well, I think my comment kind of summarizes what everyone has said. about that humility and the fun. Well, I mean, my work is around building communities and kind of weaving strengths and assets together. So what happens is that there's so much possibilities that can happen with human beings. You can't predict, but you can prepare. Prepare for what? You're not really sure. But you're humble enough to know that the future you cannot predict, but you can constantly be aware that anything can happen. And you have that kind of, opportunity to explore what is it that is coming and how prepared am I for that. Beyond just your home preparation, you also have the awareness that you have people, gifts, assets, communities that are eager to ensure that if it happens this way, let's all jump in here and make it happen. If it does not happen that way, why not? Let life go on. And then, we continue to kind of explore that human potential, coming up every day. That's just my thought on that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And two comments that came in from the chat that I think are worth bringing in. One from Marcel de Berg, that it's almost impossible to predict events. But what is possible is to predict the breeding ground, the context out of which these events can happen. And I think that's very important in understanding the future, is to look at some of the mega trends that are framing the context of events, because that gives you the frame within which the black swan incidences take shape. And then I think Cuff Ferguson is making a very important point, that he says, interestingly, when one allows one's consciousness to tap into the future, one encounters probable realities. Then the challenge is to try to get a sense of the intensity of the energy that appears to be related to a particular probable reality. And what was coming up in my mind was the great line from Rilke, that the future speaks ruthlessly through us. And the people that can hear that call are the ones that change the world. The future speaks ruthlessly through us, he says. And that's what changes the world. So in that spirit, I want to thank you, Fash, for a splendid convening today, and Randy and Clarice and Carl. I've been feeling the future speaking ruthlessly through you, and know that you're all changing the world in your sphere of influence and action. So I just want to honor that today, and thank you very, very, very much. And tomorrow, everyone, we're going to continue the conversation with the Foresight, Next Generation Foresight Practitioners, and grapple with these issues of how we shape the future in such uncertain times. Everyone is now invited to the after chat session. You'll see the link in the chat. I bid you farewell. Thank you so much for your attention and participation today. And we'll see everybody again tomorrow, same time, same station, on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.